So in today's video, I'm sharing 3 steps for setting boundaries in relationships with toxic people because it looks different and you need to be able to protect yourself no matter what is going on around you. Now, if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So what are boundaries? They're basically limits you set for yourself that reflect your values and what's important to you. They're also about what behaviors you will or won't accept in any relationship. Boundaries are not about getting somebody else to stop their behavior because we can't control that. Now, when it comes to boundary violations, this is super common when you're talking about toxic people. Toxic people don't respect boundaries, often because they either miss the social cues or they don't understand when they're overstepping or hurting you because they're much more focused on themselves and what they want. Or they may have narcissistic tendencies where they absolutely don't have any empathy or feeling for you because they're much more consumed and obsessed with themselves and getting what they want. So with toxic people, that's why boundaries are so challenging because they don't respect boundaries in the same way. Now, if you've ever had your boundaries violated, say yes in the comments because I'm right there with you. I know how painful this is, but this video is gonna help. And stay until the end where I give you a bonus tip on how you can ensure your boundary is always going to work. So the first step in setting boundaries in relationships with toxic people is that you need to wake up to what your boundaries are. And what I mean by that is we can't set a boundary until we know what it is. So what I suggest is get a pen and paper and write down all the behaviors that are totally unacceptable to you in relationship. Whether that's yelling, name calling, making you feel guilty, making you question your reality, gaslighting, any type of physical boundary like not respecting your privacy, standing too close to you, hovering, anything that you find unacceptable to you, I want you to write down. Because it's super important in setting boundaries that you have to know what those limits are. Because in order to protect yourself, you have to set boundaries in relationships. And even though with toxic people this is more challenging, this 3-step process is going to help. So the first thing you're going to do is to wake up and write down what your boundaries are. Your second step in setting boundaries in relationships with toxic people is that you're going to speak up. And what I mean by that is you're gonna have to say something, and this is where it gets hard. This is where the fear gets in the way. But here's the thing, this is gonna help the other person understand where your limits are, even if they don't respect your limits. Once you start telling them, hey, this is not acceptable to me, when you yell at me, I'm gonna walk away. I'm gonna take a break. Now, if it's a behavior that you tend to mutually do, like you tend to yell back, then I want you to use we. When we start to yell, I'm gonna walk away. When we start to get nasty with each other, I'm gonna leave and take a break. Because the we can be a softer way to set that boundary. And sometimes that can actually help the toxic person not get so defensive. Now, if it is a behavior that they alone are doing, then I want you to state that. I want you to state that when you do this behavior, I'm going to leave, okay? That's a very powerful boundary. If during the argument they're actually gaslighting you, you can say, you know what, right now this isn't working, I'm gonna take a break. I wouldn't necessarily name behaviors like gaslighting or being abusive because you don't want to describe the boundary in a way that they're going to react to. We want to minimize that. So when you're describing the boundary or the behavior that you're trying to get away from, I want you to do it in neutral terms. Avoid using words like always or never because let's face it, that isn't true anyway. It's much more powerful when setting a boundary with a toxic person to just name the behavior in a neutral way and then see if they are willing to respect it or stop their behavior. If they're not, then you go to step 3, which is you need to stand up. And that means following through. Because the way you ensure your boundary is going to be respected is you don't tolerate the behavior. You don't stay and wait and try to convince them to stop. You actually say, you know what, I need to go. If it's so toxic and you don't even feel safe saying that, then just leave the room. Here's another tip. When you're in a difficult discussion with someone who's toxic, I want to make sure you have plenty of room. Don't do this in a car or in a closed space where you feel trapped. Do it where you know you have an exit plan. Because here's the thing, You don't know what the toxic person is capable of doing. They can blow up, they can throw things. So to ensure your safety, you need to make sure that there's an exit close by, because how you enforce your boundary is that you leave. So in order for a boundary to work, you need to be able to control it, which means that when somebody does something unacceptable to you, whether it's a toxic behavior or an abusive behavior, you decide in that moment if you can tolerate it or not. So most of the time with toxic people, you will have to stand up and you will have to leave. You're not going to be able to stay and convince them or be nice or try to appease them and make them feel better. That's typically not going to work, because the most powerful message you can send to that toxic person is that you're not going to tolerate it. And the way we do that is by removing ourselves from their presence. Now, with someone who's narcissistic, this gets their attention because narcissistic people want an audience. A full-blown narcissist is not necessarily going to change their behavior. So when you remove yourself, that gets their attention. And sometimes that will help shape the behavior in a healthier way. So for a boundary to work, it can't be a request and it can't be an ultimatum. You can't ask them to change their behavior, and you can't say, if you don't stop, I'm going to leave you, because usually that's an empty threat anyway. But the more powerful way to do it is to actually leave the room, because ironically, you can help minimize abusive behavior by not participating in it. And that's the real power of setting a boundary, is for you to just leave the situation. So here's the bonus tip that I promised you. To ensure that your boundary works, I want you to create a plan B. And this is an alternative so that no matter what the other person says, you are protected. Because if they don't respect your boundary, you have created a plan B. So for instance, maybe you're going to a party with them and they get really drunk and they're starting to get nasty. Maybe you take an Uber home. Maybe that's your plan B. Because in going to that party, that's going to make you feel a lot safer knowing that you have an alternative that doesn't depend on what the other person is doing. That's why creating a plan B is so powerful, because it's something you can control. It's not something that has anything to do with what the other person is doing. Because when you're talking about setting a healthy boundary, it has to be something you can control in order for it to work. So the next step I want you to do is I have a free training on better boundaries with Sharon Martin. I know you're going to love it, and that's going to be your next step. Thanks so much.